we set out to build Candor because there's an absurd volume of revenue that is lost during the closing stages of enterprise deals. Myself and my co-founders, we felt the pain ourselves. We had our own horror story at our last organization where we had a 3-month RFP, quote unquote, that lasted 13 months. And the buyer told us that we won the deal only to, in the very next call, ask us for unlimited limitation of liability, which you guys may have felt similar pains around. We set out to address that kind of challenge with Candor. And what we are doing is we're creating a space for knowledge sharing about what it's like to sell to specific organizations so that AEs, as you come into these kinds of deals, you can get ahead of the game by understanding the types of hurdles that you're going to run into in your sales cycle. And we try to gather that information and give it to you in quantitative and qualitative formats to help you plan your sales pursuits. And our goal is to help AEs answer the really hard questions that come up in enterprise deal cycles, right? How do I get my deal from qualified to closed? How do I protect pricing, avoid toxic terms, and everything to, am I talking to folks that have real decision-making authority? Okay, so that's Candor, but let's jump into our content for today. So we're going to kick it off with something that every seller, is feeling in their soul right now. Buying teams are just getting bigger and bigger. They're multiplying like rabbits. It's not us, that's making up that content. The big brains in the research world are backing it up. Forrester is reporting that buying groups are including more than 13 people. Almost every deal now is crossing multiple buying departments. SBI says it's around 11. Challenger says that buying groups have jumped from 5 to 11 over the last several years. At this rate, closing deals are going to require a quorum from the United Nations. So with Candor, we're trying to help by offering a few things on those cycles, titles of past champions that others have worked through, how effective they've been, what order the approval processes will take, past detractors that have shown up, things like that. But Scott, let me pass this one over to you. How are the best reps today going beyond titles and org charts and understanding the actual power structure in these buying committees?
Yeah, doing the upfront research, utilizing AI, mapping everything out. Of course, this is kind of standard, I would say. It's a great question from Corby, by the way. How are we defining enterprise deals? For the purpose of this meeting, I would just say whatever it is in your org, just think of it that way and just adjust advice and information kind of accordingly. But you have to go above and beyond, and you have to look at it not like there's one person signing the paperwork. If we use Challenger's number of 11, the way I look at it is there's 11 different people signing the paperwork, and I have to get 11 different signatures. And a lot of people don't like to look at it that way because it's too long, too complicated, too much work, too much effort. Unfortunately, I think that's what it takes. And some of those signatures of those 11 people will be quite easy, and some of them will be damn near impossible. So you've got to find a new and interesting and unique way to get in front of people. For example, I myself just got back from Las Vegas earlier this week, and I'm trying to close what is an enterprise deal for me, which would be a couple $100,000, okay, in my business. And I know one of my prospects is going to Amazon reInvent in Las Vegas. So what I did was I rented a black town car, and I waited with the town car for this guy to show up from his flight. And I met him and I got into the town car with him. And now I got 30 minutes private conversation with this person. That's not something that, is expected, is normal, or anything like that. I was talking to my friend, Samantha McKenna, the other day. And then she made this post about one of her strategies that she did, where she was talking to somebody and they were talking about their hair color. And she booked a hair appointment for her and her prospect. So they sat next to each other in this salon getting their hair done, and they chit-chatted for however many hours they were there about it. So it's these type of like non-traditional, weird, off the wall, non-scalable kind of things that you've got to do sometimes that most people are not doing and not thinking about, whether that's leadership not supporting the creativity, or whether that's the AE sort of not having the guts or the wherewithal to push for that type of stuff. But these are the types of things that I want you to think about. I want you to think about every member of that committee being equally as important, even if they're sort of not as important on paper. Getting 11 different signatures rather than sort of downplaying one or two people's importance and going for the one. And then trying to find new and interesting and unique ways to just stand out and get some FaceTime with people. And I think that FaceTime thing matters more and more and more as we go forward.
Yeah, I saw the post about your friend who had that was met her champion in the hair salon, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
about what happens when new stakeholders pop up late in the game? How do you handle that without having to kind of restart the whole hit sales cycle?
Well, it's interesting that you frame it that way. Um, because if that happened, like we have to recognize that we screwed up, right? And I find it interesting that you framed it that way because that's exactly how most people think about it. Like, I got to keep this going without starting over. And my answer to everybody is fuck you. You have to start over because you just screwed up. You actually have to start over. And what most people do is they sort of rush through it or they assume like the 12 other people told this person and filled them in and they're pretty up to date. And in my experience, that's never the case. It's never the case. So my advice is actually I have to pause, beat myself up for 30 seconds and say, please don't ever do that again, Scott. And then say, you know what? I have to go back to the beginning with this person. I have to I have to carve out maybe one-on-one time with that person so I don't waste 10 other people's time on this particular call. But I have to find a way to go back to the beginning with that new person and slowly build them up to the point where I've got their signature. And then I got to go back to the whole group and say, I think I got everybody's, metaphorical signature on this now. Like, where are we going from here? And most people, I think, are unwilling to do that, unwilling to admit that mistake, unwilling to do all that dirty work again, to do that extra meeting again, to show that person that they're equally as important. So, yeah, I'm glad you phrased it that way because my advice is sort of don't do it that way. My
Right.
advice is recognize that you do have to go back to the beginning with that one person and be willing to do so.
So no shortcuts in enterprise sales.
Not,
Got it.
not in my opinion, not in my opinion. I think enterprise buyers and sellers are very savvy and they know you know when you're being shortcut. You know when something's being kind of, shoved down your throat a little bit, or I know where the six or seven of you got a more thorough explanation or more time was spent with you. And I'm a human being with an ego, and I might shoot the deal down just because I don't feel as important. And that's not where you want to be, right? And I'm not taking that risk with a brand new stranger. I want that person to feel equally as important.
I love
Again,
that.
even if they're not, I want them to feel that way.
All right, let's move on to our next topic. It's everyone's favorite part of the sales cycle. This is where deals go to retire. Sometimes it can be the Bermuda Triangle of revenue, security and legal review. Friction here, it's not imagined, right? The world, it's gotten a lot scarier out there. Security scorecard, they're showing that more than 70% of organizations have dealt with at least one serious third-party cybersecurity incident in just the past year. The law firm Freshfields is highlighting that regulators have put data privacy on steroids, and somehow more than half of employees are casually uploading sensitive information into random SaaS apps like it's no big deal. And that's according to the Cloud Security Alliance. I'm sure none of those folks are sales reps. Um, with the candor, we try to help by offering intel on things like the duration and difficulty of past security reviews, calling out prior points of contention in the deal cycles that other sellers have experienced, and also sharing how teams have evaluated AI components and products. But Scott, what are the best reps focusing on before it gets to those reviews so that when the deal does land there, they've already built alignment and trust?
Well, you're setting proper expectations. Of course, you're starting this process early. Of course, I think that they get in direct contact, by the way, with the legal person rather than have to use a go between or use your champion as the only way to communicate with that legal procurement kind of person. I know that's always what I've tried to do with my teams. Something interesting that you didn't mention, and it's not on this slide, is I like to, let's say I'm trying to sell to Candor. Okay. I would ask my network basically who has sold to Candor before. So in my conversations with Ryan at Candor, I would have learned like whatever their tech stack is, right? Whatever, pick a thing, your CRM or whatever. And he picks HubSpot. And I'm like, okay, well, I know a bunch of people at HubSpot. So I start asking people at HubSpot, hey, who do you guys, who sold the deal over at this place over there? And these are, in theory, you know, people that are part of my network, and I've become friendly with them and built relationships with them and so forth. So I want to get connected to the right person and say, hey, I'm in a, you know, deal cycle with Candor, curious, you know, what your experience was like getting through XYZ process, getting through legal, you know, tips, tricks, what did you do to get it done? I'm basically just sharing. I'm trying to share information or get information shared to me. And in turn, I'll share information back with somebody else by saying, you know, hey, Steven, hey, Zach, hey, Colby, like, you know, whoever you're trying to do deals with, maybe I've done deals with them before and I can give you some kind of clues. So that's sort of like crowdsourcing of information. I think is a really unique way that a lot of top reps get these enterprise deals done, right? Hard to do this play, by the way, if you don't have a good network. So, you know, sidecar to that, build your freaking network up so you can run this kind of play. But this is what really good enterprise reps do. I'll tell you an example. I've worked for years now with Gong, and I have a good relationship with the team. And I have reps come to me all the time from that team at Gong and say, "Hey, I know you've worked with HubSpot. I know you worked with Rippling. I know you did this. You did this other thing over here. How the heck did you guys get these deals done with them? Like, I'm working this thing. Any tips?" They ask me these questions all the time, and I'm sharing that information whenever people ask me, right? And I just think that some enterprise sellers don't think that way. They don't make those asks. They don't even know that that's like a play or whatnot, or they feel guilty or like they're taking too much from their network or whatever. But hey, you don't get what you don't ask for, and you just have to reciprocate when and if, you know, there's an opportunity, right? So I've helped Gong in this way with all these deals. And what do? You know, they just emailed me the other day saying, send us the sponsorship prospectus for Surf and Sales 2026. So like that's their way potentially of, you know, scratching my back, right? Whether they send people or sponsor the event. So if you do that enough with your network where you're giving, not just taking, I think people are very receptive to that type of crowdsourcing and sharing of information. So that's a unique play that I don't see on this slide.
I love that. But well, we're big on information sharing, so I totally agree. And generating that feeling of reciprocity, it makes a lot of sense. We're getting a little short on time, so I'm gonna get us on our next topic. We've talked about, you know, the humans in the deal. Let's talk about the robots, right? Right now, the AI conversation, it feels a little bit like a hype tornado. You know, on one side, you've got people saying that AI is the new miracle drug. Salesforce is saying that 81% of sales teams are already experimenting with it or rolling it out. McKinsey has said that you know, some companies are reporting up to 15% revenue lift from it, which is fantastic. Other folks like Jason Lemkin, you know, they're in the camp of saying that AI can sometimes make things worse if you rely on it too much. It spits out kind of generic junk, could damage your trust. It could, you know, turn, you know, a seller into a keyboard passenger. So there's a lot of confusion out there in the world. You know, our kind of take on this is that AI is best used to help sellers level up their game, particularly in sales strategies. We do things like we're offering an SEC integration to help analyze 10 Qs and get you strategy and insights. We're highlighting themes from the buying cycles from other sellers and, you know, consistent recurring patterns that have showed up in these deals. We're looking at those things through the lens of your product and why it matters. But Scott, help us cut through the noise. You know, from your experience, you know, where does AI add real leverage, and where can it, you know, introduce new risks or blind spots?
Well, I would hope that nobody here is just using it on autopilot and they don't need that level of information. But to me, there's three things. It's a three-pronged formula, if you will. Um, you've got to have clarity, number one. Clarity around outcomes, clarity around pain, clarity around process and champion and all this kind of stuff, right? Why are they buying it? What do they need it for? What is it? How does it help them get to their goal? That's all just clarity. The second part is relationships, which I sort of just touched upon with that last play. Whether that's network or a network effect or the different platforms out there that help you kind of utilize referrals to break into accounts and things like that. In a world that is increasingly automated, arguably the thing that's going to last longest for us is something that AI cannot replicate, and that is human to human relationships and connection. And you can utilize those connections, like I said before, to get in front of people in ways that AI can't do. Right. And the last part is the intelligent use of automation. That's the formula. It's those three. When those three things are working together in conjunction, that's what's going to win. I don't think you can just do one of those three and win in an enterprise environment. I don't think you can even do two. I think it has to be all three, not one or the other, all three kind of working together. So
Yeah.
intelligent timing, intelligent application, making sure you run the final mile or two, to use a kind of marathon analogy. If AI is running the first 24, you're running the last 2.2, right? So it's those three. So that's, I know we're pressed for time, so I'm kind of condensing it, but like clarity, relationships, and intelligent automation, that's the formula, I think.
I love that. We my own real quick tip is you got to nail your messaging before you really can even look at AI. Right. I've made the mistake of trying to have AI help me kind of refine my messaging, and sent out hundreds of emails and had zero response rate. So yeah, you gotta nail your messaging first. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. I want to jump into the chat and see if we have some good questions for Scott before we drop off here. So let's see.
There's a question from Steven about multi-threading.
How best to multi-thread? That's a good one.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to my mind is micro thread, multi-thread early. A lot of people wait to do it. Like they'll know there's 11 people and they just only talk to one person. And then once they're done with that one, they're like, hey, can I talk to person two? So I like to do it early, start really early. I kind of call out the monster under the bed, if you will. It's like, I know there's freaking 12 people involved in this thing. I know here's the 12 people. Okay. So I'm going to be talking to all of them. Help me make it easier on all of us, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a great way to deal with it, frankly, is rather than kind of ignore it and kind of try to skirt around it, just kind of call a spade, be direct with it. So we're all on the same page about it, and do it early and do it often. Treat each one, like I've said a few times now, but treat each one as equally important, even if they're technically not on the power scale. I like to communicate to each person what other people are saying and thinking. There was a question above from Kara, I think, about, hey, do you go relay what you found back to the champion? I do. So if I'm talking to you, Stephen, and I multi-thread with Colby, I'm like, hey, I was talking to Colby and he cared about this a lot. And I was talking to Jake and he cared about that a lot. And I was talking to Ryan and he cared about that a lot. So all of you kind of care about the same things, but you also have the slightly different use case or whatever. So I'm keeping everybody informed and letting everybody know that like I'm having all these kind of different conversations if they're happening in sidecars, not as a group the whole entire time. I think it's a bit of a mistake to just silo out each conversation and not share. So those are a couple tips, Stephen. Hopefully that's sort of what you're hoping for.
You got a
Yep.
good follow-up from Colby. Would you say these strategies can apply for mid-market for deals in the 50 to 100K, annual territory?
I think they can. I don't think that they necessarily have to. It's hard to answer without further context. So let me just say it that way. Yes, they can. Do you have to? I hope not. I hope not, but they can work. And I do utilize them. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love it. And maybe we've got two more minutes, maybe one last question. I think it's a good one. Like, what is the AI tech stack that you recommend? What are you using the most?
Oh, goodness. Um, GPT, Claude, Gemini, that stuff for just regular like research and forecasting, mapping, things like that. I'm not a big like content generating AI kind of person, nor am I an email generating AI kind of person. So I might not be the best, you know, advocate for some of those things. I've already mentioned like Gong and obviously the note taking, summary, automatic follow up stuff, automatic put in the CRM. I was just talking to this company today that has a little wearable device for outside sales field teams. So it's one of the gripes with these call recording things when you have an outside team is like it's impossible to capture the calls and therefore impossible to coach people and do the note taker thing. Well, they have this little wearable kind of clip on device that does all that, and I was like, oh, that'll be good for anybody who's got an outside field team. Um, that's called Buddy, by the way, BUDDIE.ai. So stuff like that. Maybe that one is new and unique. Other than that, you've probably all heard of the other ones before. So
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we are at time. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Scott. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for joining as well. We are going to send out a follow-up with the recording of the webinar as well as a link to join up for Candor. And if you do join, you get 10 free Deal Retro credits that you can use to consume all that good content on how these enterprises buy. So thanks so much, everyone.
everybody, thank you.